Welcome, everybody, to our subject matter expert series. My name is Brian Hopkins, and I'm here with my good friend Alex Chausovsky, and he's the director of analytics and consulting at Bundy Group. And we're here to talk about one of the hottest topics in distribution, and that is navigating this new normal that is the global tariff crisis. And one of the things, this is a new series for DSG, and it falls in line with what we're trying to do is bring the distribution audience information that we know that they need to hear and we know that they need to pay attention to. And this is obviously one of them. So we're really excited to have Alex on board today to kind of go through some stuff on tariffs. As a reminder, please, there's a chat out there. If you've got questions, we're going to leave time for questions and answers. Please make sure you utilize that because we want to make sure that we answer as many questions as you have. So a couple of commercial things before we get started. So applied AI for distributors. This is a show you cannot afford to miss. Outside of the 25 plus tech partners that we've got there to help you figure out what you need to do next, we've got an amazing group of speakers from Noel Russell to Trent Gillespie, two thought leaders when it comes to AI in the world, including Trent, who spent a lot of time at Amazon and put together their last mile strategy. So we're really excited to have them. And then we've got a whole host of speakers and panelists that are in the distribution world and have tackled this problem of AI. And they're going to be there to help us figure out how to make AI actionable in your business. So please sign up. Tickets are going quickly. This is, again, an event you're not going to want to miss. Go to appliedforAIdistributors.com and sign up today. And this show is sponsored by our good friends at Epicor. They are a software company that's helped thousands of distributors over the last 50 years integrate their business functions into one ERP system. Because of their deep experience in distribution, they understand your world and your unique challenges. I can attest from personal experience with P21, they absolutely get it. Epicor's ERP are designed to help you operate more efficiently today while preparing you for whatever comes next. They'll transform your ERP from a system of record to a system of insights and action using practical, outcome-focused, and responsible AI. Epicor solutions provide distributors like you with a consolidated ERP that's ready to use out of the box and allows for long-term growth. If you're interested in new technology, they'd love to chat with you to understand exactly what you're looking for. You can reach out to them at epicor.com/distribution. So without further ado, Alex, let's kind of talk about tariffs and where the world is at with them, if we can figure that out.
Well, we'll certainly do our best. Thank you very much for having me on the show, Brian. I appreciate it. Always glad to be in front of a DSG audience. And, my job, as I see it, is to be very objective and analytical when I assess the situation on the ground. I don't fall into either bucket on the political spectrum when I talk about this purposefully, because I think the action and the data-driven approach that business leaders need to focus on in responding to this environment really requires that kind of down the middle of the aisle analysis and assessment. And that's exactly what I hope to deliver in this next 30 minutes or so. The slides that I've prepared really cover kind of two topical areas. Number one, I want to talk about the current landscape as it stands here in the beginning of May. There's obviously been a flurry of activity in the last month, new information constantly coming out, new product categories always being considered and talked about and assessed whether or not we should or shouldn't apply tariffs. The latest salvo, just the last 24 to 48 hours, was we're potentially thinking about putting tariffs on foreign-made movies, which is the first time that we're talking about, putting tariffs on services and non kind of product-oriented things, which will be really interesting to see that unfold. It's already been walked back by President Trump to some degree. On the one hand, he did that. On the other hand, he talked about how he doesn't think very highly of the Wall Street Journal, that they're, not a very good publication. So making sense of all of this and keeping up with it is my job. Translating it into direct action that should be taken by the distribution community is also part of what I hope to accomplish today. And I'm going to do that by focusing on the second element, which is really looking at the divergence that has occurred between the actual data that economists and analysts like myself typically rely on in tracking the economy, in trying to get a sense of where we are today, where we're heading in the future. And then the soft data, which is more opinion and kind of sentiment-based analysis of how we feel, think, talk, and generally speaking, the vibes that we're getting from the economy. So we're going to look at that. And then, of course, I want to leave plenty of room on the back end for Q&A, both for your questions and for questions that the audience might have. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get right into it. I think it's important to just lay things out in a easy to understand manner. So there's three different categories, if you will, here of tariffs that I've highlighted. The green sections are currently live, and added to that, you can see the fourth item on that list, 25% tariff on all car parts. That went into effect just a few days ago. So that is now green as well. But we've got basically the 10% global baseline tariff that President Trump has been talking about, since the campaign trail. We've got 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, anything having to do with cars and car parts. We've got specific country duties on Canada and Mexico. Any products non-compliant with the USMCA are under a 25% duty. In the case of Canada, we are carving out energy and fertilizer under a lower threshold, which is 10%. We, of course, have the 145% tariffs on all imported goods from China, and that's on top of the existing previous President Trump and President Biden era tariffs. So really prohibitive stuff. We've seen port traffic in Los Angeles and other ports that are bringing in container ships from China basically grind to a halt. I saw the latest data was down about 65% on a year-over-year basis. There's a lot of concern about what that's going to do in terms of, not only affecting the industry itself, meaning, when port traffic is down, there's jobs at that port that are going to be affected. And then the trickle-down effect of that, trucking, warehouse jobs that are going to be all related with a lack of product coming into the country from China. But then, of course, the shortages that we are expecting in terms of consumer products now. We get a lot of our basic consumer staples, clothing, electronics, toys, Christmas decorations. So suppliers like Walmart and Target are now talking about shortages for the upcoming 2025 holiday season around Christmas time, because now is when they're doing the bulk of their purchasing for that period of time. So a lot of really impactful stuff already in place. We've got, of course, other areas that are being kind of worked through right now. And the two that I would highlight are the reciprocal tariffs that have been delayed for 90 days. So there's currently negotiations happening with countries. According to President Trump and his staff, something like 70 countries have already come and tried to negotiate their way out of these reciprocal tariffs. That pause of 90 days lasts through basically early July. So we should have a lot more clarity in terms of what that looks like in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And there's definitely an impetus on the countries to be first mover, meaning capitulate as much as you can, bring your best deal, because the country that gets that first deal is probably going to get the best deal, and then it's going to trickle down from there. So that's going to be really interesting. That element of timing is something that's very important when you talk about the economic outlook and the impact on distribution in particular. I think if we can get most of this stuff settled in the next 6 to 8 weeks, there is still hope for skirting a recession, not having that huge negativity by the end of the year. If this drags out into the latter part of Q3, Q4, then I think we have a very limited amount of time to rebound from the uncertainty and the kind of stoppage of activity that we've seen since April 2nd. And the probability of recession is much higher as a result of that. Now, when I say the word recession, I don't want to elicit the feelings of 2020 or 2008, 2009 in people. Those are the last two major recessions that we've had. We're talking about the kind of recession that is likely the 2016 industrial production production recession, which was more in the 1.5% to 2% contraction. So mild contractionary behavior by the end of the year. It's going to depend on what happens in the labor market. It's going to depend on how quickly we can get through this period of uncertainty. And as long as we know what the tariffs are, even if there are tariffs in place, as long as companies can start to adapt and adjust pricing based on the knowns, then I think that there is some evidence that the economy is fairly resilient and we should be able to continue to kind of chug along, if not, grow as quickly as we were hoping to at the beginning of the year. So at a minimum, we're going to have a slowdown. Certainly the possibility of recession is out there. And there are also some ongoing concerns that I have regarding product considerations. So things like copper is being studied right now. Things like lumber is being studied. Those are obviously two markets that are very important to DSG clients and to members of the distribution community, whether it's plumbing equipment and electrical equipment, or if it's building materials and other things involved in the construction trades. All of these things are being assessed right now with reports on the impact of protectionist policy only due by November. So there's still that uncertainty out there. So a lot's still up in the air, but I do believe that we should see quite a bit of clarity in the next 6 to 8 weeks in terms of at least these reciprocal tariffs. The item on the bottom, the port of call tariffs, an additional charge of basically 1 to 3.5 million cost per Chinese vessel, or whether it's manufactured, owned, or operated by China. That's also a really interesting thing that has potential to disrupt trucking and shipbuilding and all sorts of elements. So a lot still up in the air, but at least these are what we have in place right now and what is still being considered. Now, as we look at the possibility of what the outcome will be, obviously here this chart shows you, the individual country reciprocal tariffs that President Trump touted on his Liberation Day message and agenda on April 2nd. So you can see China is the only one really that has those advanced tariffs in place right now. But the possibility of tariffs on countries like Vietnam, for example, you can see going up to 46%. Countries that are largely focused kind of in that Southeast Asia corridor, when you're talking about Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines. That's where I think the vulnerability is the highest. And so as a distributor, if I am exposed to those markets, that's where I'm really putting a lot of my concern right now. I am encouraged by the fact that, for example, the Prime Minister of Vietnam was one of the first ones out the door saying, look, we are more than willing to concede here. We're more than willing to lower our tariffs on American products coming in. So it'll be really interesting how that unfolds in the next month or two. But the vulnerabilities are certainly there in terms of, the countries that are most susceptible to disruption, economic contraction, and the effects of a lack of trade with the U.S. You can see here anything towards the upper right corner of the screen here shows the countries most affected. So as I mentioned, Vietnam certainly on the list, Cambodia, India is also high up there. Almost 20% of their exports are going to the U.S. market, and so that could be essentially devastating for some of those economies.
So I know we'll get into questions, but there's a lot of reports out there that India is the first one to fall and grab a deal. It sounds like that might be the one. If that happens, how do you feel like that's going to domino affect the rest?
Yeah, I think India is a really good bellwether. It's not surprising to me that India is most willing to concede. In fact, if you look at India's import tariffs for U.S. products, they're one of the highest in the world. They're above 14% on average as of 2024, whereas our import tariffs for Indian products are somewhere around 3%. So there's a lot of room for them to be willing to negotiate on that. And they obviously are trying to shift their economy more towards a services-oriented approach anyway. So I think that if that domino were to fall, we will see a large rush of other countries wanting to strike deals as well. When I look at the ones that are most vulnerable, my expectation fully is the next 8 weeks, we get some clarity in terms of what they're willing to concede. Countries that are more difficult, so mainland China, for example. Yes, a lot of their exports are to the US, but there are issues on the table that are non-trade deficit related, right? We're talking about intellectual property protection. We're talking about access to the Chinese market for US companies, unrestricted. We're talking about military and defense considerations. Those are much tougher negotiations that will likely drag on. I expect at least 6 months worth of back and forth, if not longer. So that vulnerability is certainly going to be. I think that the tariffs of 145% will be pulled back before that happens. But even if we go down by 50% to 70%, that's still extremely disruptive, as you can imagine. Yeah, right. And talking about the countries in Southeast Asia, I think once those dominoes start to fall, then you'll have the likes of Turkey, the likes of the European Union also wanting to strike deals as quickly as possible. So obviously a lot to be settled in the next kind of 8-week period, but we'll see how it all shakes out. My expectation is the countries that are most susceptible on this chart are the ones that are going to be some of the first deals that we see across the board.
Yeah, and it sounds like the Canadian Prime Minister was in Washington today, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the Canadians are obviously, they have to talk a tough game, especially in the run-up to the election. They have to have a very strong kind of, I'm going to stand up to, the bullying position, but Canadian economy is obviously very susceptible to the exports to the U.S. and imports from the U.S. It's not something that they want to escalate, and so I imagine that there will be a deal with Canada and Mexico in relatively short order as well. In the meantime, I think it's important to recognize that, both historically and currently, there are things that distributors can turn to. There are strategies that are available to them that can mitigate at least some of the pain associated with the tariffs. So this information from KPMG shows that, at least in the first administration that President Trump had from 2016 to 2020, substantial savings were available to companies. Today, some of these things are no longer really impactful. So, for example, duty drawbacks, none of the tariffs impacted since the start of 2025, which were done by executive order, are actually eligible for duty drawback after the fact. So that's not a technique that companies can use right now, but one that I have seen increasingly leveraged, and one I think that actually lends itself quite well to that timing element that I mentioned earlier, are bonded warehouses. So for those of you that aren't aware or are familiar with bonded warehouses, basically these are either controlled by the local port authority or the state and local government, or by some of the large shipping companies like Maersk, for example. They are very different than traditional storage facilities and warehouses. They're basically allow you to store goods for a temporary period of time without paying tariffs or duties until you actually take possession of them and sell them in the marketplace. So if you're worried about, containers en route to the US right now, this is a way to at least implement a delaying tactic to see how things shake out over the next 6 to 8 weeks. To give you some context here in terms of the cost of such an initiative, typically bonded warehouse space costs about 60% more than normal warehouse space. So there is a cost associated with implementing this, but that cost oftentimes, especially if you're bringing in things from China, is a temporary cost. It's a known cost, and certainly one that you can bear with a little bit more ease than 145% duty right away when you take possession of those products. So I think that it is important. Yeah, exactly. Important to kind of adopt that, short-term wait and see approach. But simultaneously, I think that companies do need to be coming out with strategies on how they will react in a variety of different scenarios, right? I mean, if you think about it as a wargaming mentality, that's very apt in terms of what's happening right now. You need to know what you will do if scenario A comes to pass, scenario B, and scenario C. And the way you do that is by actually making someone responsible for that and giving mind space, time, and resources to planning for that. So the kind of crisis simulation, the creation of plans that you will implement in a variety of different outcomes requires 3 phases. The first one is to constantly be scanning and watching for these developments, which in and of itself is a full-time job based on the pace and frequency of these things happening right now. And you're looking for political, military, hybrid, societal evolutions that are going on right now. once you are aware of the changes, then you really have to bring it down to the company level, right? You have to understand, how do these things impact my company function? Meaning, what's the impact on revenue? How does that affect my operation and supply chain? What is the impact on human capital and things like compliance? I've seen companies try to take creative approaches in skirting some of the tariffs. And I can tell you, Customs and Border Protection is their administration and their due diligence in terms of making sure that they're following the book for President Trump right now is through the roof. And so I highly advise you to not try to be creative at this point. There are strategies that you can implement, like the bonded warehouse, that allow you to mitigate the risk without having to go outside of the parameters of what's allowed and what's not. And then, of course, the last element being, once you know what is happening, let's say we get to the July timeframe and we know what those tariffs are, then you can actually implement that. But the key here is you've got to have those plans already in place so that you're going to implementation rather than scrambling to come up with those plans at that period of time. The companies that are first out the gate in implementation are going to have a significant competitive advantage. So it's very, very important for them to do that now so that they're prepared for when the knowns become a little bit more crystallized. So
not necessarily COVID type planning, but similar mindset, right? Of making sure that you're scenario planning just about whatever can happen.
That's right. You know the levers that are available for you to pull. What will you do in scenario A, B, and C, right? If you're thinking and your gut tells you there's going to be a recession in this country, for example, because it's not even across the board. Different sectors go through different business cycle phases at different times. And so, for example, one of my planning recommendations is, okay, you think you're going to have a contraction this year. What do you do differently if your revenue is down 5% versus 10% versus 20+%, right? Do you have the right line of credit in place to make sure that your cash flow is sustainable even if orders drop off? If you're one of the key industries that actually benefits from tariffs, how are you going to take advantage of those things? These are the kind of questions that all business leaders need to be asking themselves right now and coming up with plans on how they will behave once the information solidifies a little bit more.
Makes sense.
So, there's a lot still to unfold, but in the meantime, I wanted to talk about what's going on economically so that we can have people have a better sense of what the data is telling us rather than what headlines are telling us. And this is a great example. So when we got our Q1 GDP print, there were all sorts of fairly sensationalist headlines out there, like this one: U.S. economy shrank in early 2025 as tariffs sapped growth. Well, if you look deeper, if you dig into the details, you can see that our economy did not actually shrink. So there are basically four elements to tracking GDP. There's the government spending element, which is colored in blue. There's the yellow, which is the trade deficit, the difference between exports and imports of goods and services. There's the business investment element, which is gray, and then the personal consumption element, which is orange. And you'll notice here that the vast majority of the negativity was related to the fact that we accelerated imports in Q1. We really brought forward those purchases. You can see that in the yellow area to the far right, whereas business investment actually had one of the best quarters in the last 3 years. That gray area, again, companies are front loading for sure to get in front of the tariffs, but that activity, that buying behavior was certainly not indicative of a contraction in GDP, right? Neither is the orange section, which did show that personal consumption slowed. But once again, when we look at the data, we're not seeing that in the hard numbers. And so I thought a good way to assess kind of not only where we are today, but what the trajectory is moving forward would be to look at the hard data versus the soft data, right? So this is a different way of looking at GDP than what most of the articles talked about in the last few days. This is real GDP, which means it's already adjusted for inflation. And I'm tracking this as billions of dollars on a 12-month trailing total over time. So you can see in the last quarter, which is Q1 2025, we were actually near a record high. It was a slight tick down relative to Q4, but it was not significant contraction the way that you see in 2008, 2009, or 2020, when we shut down the economy for COVID. I like to describe this as the face value of economic data. But just like when you meet a person, it's also important to look below the surface and consider the vital signs as well as the external appearance of someone, right? So in the case of a person, you're looking for heart rate or cholesterol level or blood pressure. The same way of looking at a person's health, you can do for the economy. So here I'm looking at that very same data, but I'm plotting this as a quarter over quarter growth rate, which, by the way, is very, very different than the news articles report. For some reason, the reporting does a quarter to quarter comparison, which means they compare Q4, which is a booming quarter with a holiday season, to Q1. And then they say, oh, we're down 0.3%. So that's a contraction, right? If you look at Q1 of this year compared to Q1 of 2024, we're actually up 2%, as you can see here, which is very much in line with the historic 2% average of growth that we've seen over the last 20 years. So quarter over quarter growth. And the reason I look at it this way is because most distributors will look at their own performance on a year over year basis, right? They'll compare Q1 of this year to Q1 of last year. So I'm doing the same thing for the economy. And when you look at it that way, we don't have a contraction. We actually have an expansion at a 2% annualized pace, which is really encouraging to see, right? So
I think that lends itself to saying that soft data often is noise and it's loud, and especially when there's uncertainty, people get a little freaked out. And instead of doing what you're doing here, just showing the hard data, is they get freaked out by the noise and the uncertainty, and they maybe react differently. So this is just a great point to say that the hard data tells a different story.
That's right. That's right. Anytime you read a headline or an article and it's like your actual real world experience doesn't match what it's saying, ask yourself, what is the agenda of the person writing this piece? What are they trying to sell? Keep in mind, fear and anxiety draw eyeballs, right? If they were to report GDP was up 2%, about average growth last quarter, nobody would read that article, right? It's boring. That's not exciting. But doom and gloom, calamity, we've got, contraction for the first time in 3 years. That's what draws eyeballs. And you see this all the time when it comes to economic data. Right. So when we look at the economy, we break it down, extracting that net trade deficit element from the picture. We got really three big drivers. We've got personal consumption, we've got business investment, and we've got government spending. Now, typically, government spending is, roughly speaking, not volatile. It's budgeted, it's appropriated, it filters through the economy. There's really no boom and bust cycles that happen. But what we're experiencing right now is unprecedented with the DOGE cuts and the striving for efficiency, and we're trying to eliminate any unnecessary spending and waste. So even there, yes, that's going to have a mild negative impact, but it's so insignificant in the big scale of things, right? First, when Elon Musk was touting DOGE, we were talking about $2 trillion worth of cuts. Then we lowered those expectations to $1 trillion. The latest is we're achieving about $160 billion worth of savings for this fiscal year. Now, keep in mind, the federal government budget this year is $7 trillion. So we're talking about a 2% reduction in spending, nothing hugely calamitous there. The other two categories I wanted to look at in a little bit more detail. And first and foremost, we've got to look at that personal consumption element, because it is the biggest driver of economic performance at 2/3 of overall GDP. So a good way that I like to look at personal consumption is this series called Retail, Trade, and Food Services. This is publicly available data. You can go directly to the Census Bureau, or you can use the FRED database to track this month after month. But I wanted to give you this visualization to put things in a little bit of context relative to where we have been historically versus where we are in the retail environment. So you'll notice that this trend line that I've highlighted here between the end of the Great Recession in 2009 and the beginning of the COVID pandemic in 2020 basically shows smooth growth, about 2.5%, 3% year-over-year growth up and to the right. That's typically reflective of a solid state economy with good, healthy consumption expansion. We, of course, then shut down the economy in Q2 2020. We created this chasm in the data. That is the shutdown. And then the next period, you'll notice how uncharacteristic it is. The slope of that line is so much more aggressive. I've called it the revenge shopping spree, because we were so sick of sitting at home, not being able to spend money. and we had extra government money to spend, that really was an unprecedented and an unsustainable time in our nation's history in terms of the economy. But since 2023, we've been back on a very similar trend line to what we saw pre-COVID at just a higher baseline. And that higher baseline is having to do with the fact that we're paying about 30% higher prices on everything that we consume across the board on average relative to pre-pandemic times. And so that's why you see that step up effect happening there. But once again, this data is all the way through March of 2025. You can see there's no clear drop off in the retail environment happening. The same data, but plotted as a business cycle, the rates of change actually say that it's not a drop off, it's an acceleration. We were coming into 2025 with a short-term growth rate, the quarter over quarter, which is the light blue line in this chart, actually accelerating above the dark blue line, which is the annual trend line. The importance of that is that the short-term growth rate, the light blue, actually predicts or leads the direction of the dark blue line to the tune of about 5 or 6 months. So this was saying that we entered 2025 not only in solid standing, growing 3% year over year, but we were actually seeing some acceleration going on, right? So after we have the 2 recessions, after that period of unsustainable growth, we're actually not seeing any sign of a consumer-driven recession through the March data. That uptick, certainly, you have to believe that it's like front-loading, right? And especially with the March data, we saw purchases of cars, for example, jump by a significant amount as people tried to get in and purchase a vehicle before those 25% auto tariffs hit. But we are not seeing capitulation. We're not seeing the kind of performance that you see with that light blue line when we're heading into a recession, right? So you can say that through the first quarter, the consumer was very resilient in the hard data. You can't say the same thing in the sentiment data, right? And that's where the diversion is taking place. So this is the Conference Board's Consumer Sentiment Index. You can see some really interesting things here. If you look towards late 2024, after President Trump got elected, there was a spike in consumer sentiment, an outlook that was very optimistic, right? People were expecting less regulation, lower taxes, a general a better business condition for the US economy. But since the tariffs have come into play, we have this absolute falling off a cliff in the sentiment data. You can see it's really on par now through March with where we were at the depths of the COVID pandemic, which is fascinating because we know inherently that things are not nearly as bad as they were when we fully shut down the economy in Q2 2020. And yet the way that we feel, think, and talk about the economy is absolutely in the pits, as you can see here, represented by this. So you can see the divergence there between the retail sales hard data and the sentiment data here in the consumer confidence index. A similar behavior can be attributed to the industrial part of the economy, where many of the distributors that are listening today are living every single day operating in. So the main difference between GDP and industrial production, which is the benchmark for that B2B economy, is that unlike GDP, which is near record levels, the industrial economy has actually had no growth for the last 2 years. 2023 and 2024 were basically flat with a mild propensity for some minimal contraction. And looking at the business cycle, you can see that the growth rates were right at 0 for the vast majority of the last 2 years. But coming into 2025, that same element of acceleration, you can really see that, right? That light blue line is in solid positive territory for the first time in over 24 months. So I was personally actually expecting the industrial sector to accelerate and to be less of a drag on the overall economy this year. So I was expecting growth overall to improve relative to 2025. Now, that's obviously all being called into question by the tariff environment and the uncertainty. But at least with data through March, there's also no evidence in the industrial side of the market that we're looking at a contraction imminently, right? This says over the next 2 quarters, we should not see any contraction based on what that short-term growth rate is doing. So that's the hard data for the industrial, the B2B economy. You see similar trend lines specific to distribution. I have the wholesalers' sales and inventory levels. And in both cases, if you look at the top 2 lines, top 2 charts, those growth rates are moving up and to the right. as we head through the third quarter, the first quarter. So you can see that there's really no evidence there that there's going to be this major imminent collapse in economic activity. And yet, once again, when we look at sentiment, this is small business optimism index. It's not nearly as pessimistic as the consumer side, but you definitely do see the first couple of months of March and April, the pullback in response to the tariffs, right? Once again, you can see the sharp move upwards after President Trump got elected, the expectation of a more favorable business environment. But now that we have this tariff picture emerging, we have businesses really pumping the brakes. I haven't seen a lot of cancellation of orders yet or projects, but I have seen a lot of pumping the brakes, meaning delays, kind of let's wait and see what happens. Let's keep goods in those bonded warehouses instead of pulling them out, that type of behavior. So when I look at the divergence between the soft data and the hard data, my opinion is that if we can get some clarity and some kind of resolution to a lot of this uncertainty in the next 8 weeks, right, before we go into the second half of the year, I think there's enough momentum in the economy. There's enough movement on deregulation and tax cuts. And, for example, the provision for accelerated depreciation is back on the table as well, right? If we get 100% write-off and an R&D tech credit extension, that's going to stimulate a lot of activity in the second half of the year. And we could rebound. We could certainly stave off a recession if we get that clarity in the next 2 months or so. If we don't, if we have this continue into the second half of the year, then it's very difficult to envision an environment where the sentiment data eventually does not drag the hard data into negative territory as well. So that's why I think the next 6 to 8 weeks are very, very important from let's figure out what's actually going to be the pathway forward and let's start adapting to that. If we can do that, then I think we still have a chance to stave off that recession. If not, then the probability of recession, in my view, goes up quite substantially by the end of the year. So with that, that's basically the message that I wanted to deliver. This QR code for folks here is my LinkedIn page. Please feel free to connect with me. I'm always putting out opinions and analysis and commentary about the latest developments. So I'm happy to, engage with them this way. I'm going to stop sharing for now, and then we can do some Q&A, and then I'll bring the slides back up towards the end. So I hope that was helpful, Brian, but what kind of questions do you have based on that information?
All right. Yeah. And my old boss and mentor, Ron Paulson, used to say facts are friends, right? And I really appreciate the way you laid that out because, yes, the sentiment is one thing. Facts are different. The sentiment creates the noise and all the rest of it. So having that level of facts is really important. So one of the questions I had is you've got a tremendous amount of data in what you presented, and not all distributors have, economists sitting around helping them pull all this together. So what are the 2 or 3 indexes or places for people to go to say, I need to monitor these 2 or 3 things, every day, or what on some certain interval? What would you suggest?
So I would say there's 2 individual sources of much of the data that I pull. The Federal Reserve Board provides monthly data on all sorts of production series. So that's a great place to look. They have a lot of details. They break it down to the NAICS code level. So you can get industry-specific data, you can get rate of change, you can get unit volume as well as revenue, so you can see kind of the influence of pricing. The second source would be the Census Bureau. They put out a lot of new orders data, so that's actually kind of as a predictor to production level activity. That's very helpful. And then the one source, if I had to pick one, I would say utilize the FRED database. The St. Louis Federal Reserve Board has a great website. If you just type in FRED database into Google, it amalgamates, it compiles all of that data for you and actually includes a charting function already as part of that platform. You can actually link it to your Excel and have that data automatically imported. I'm always happy to walk people through how to do that because I think empowering folks with the latest available information and data is critical at this juncture as they go to make decisions for it. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. That's very helpful. So we've got a bunch of questions coming in as I predicted. The first one says, Alex, the timing of the impact, rapid price inflation just starting to work its way through the supply chain could impact coming quarters more significantly, if not reversed. What's your thoughts on
Yes,
that?
I fully agree with that. The way that I see most companies addressing the inflationary element is through surcharges right now. Surcharges are good rather compared to a flat across the board product level or customer level price increase because they can be eliminated if the tariff situations changes in the future. So I would say that yes, we are likely to feel inflation. My expectation is the CPI, which is kind of the consumer price index that I look to. I don't look at the PCE data, which is what the Fed tracks. My feeling is we're currently at 2.4% year over year on the overall CPI and 2.8% for the core index that strips out energy and food prices. I am expecting 3 to 5% on the CPI by the end of the year, with ample and generous room for upside pressure from tariffs. I mean, if we look at 25% baseline tariffs on steel and aluminum, and then think about all the areas that those materials are used in, clearly you're going to have some inflationary pressure here. So I think that yes, it will be an issue. I don't think it's inflation in the same way that inflation was visible in 22 and 23, right? When we were at 9%, in the sense that it is a one-time effect, right? It's adaptation to tariffs, which is not reflective of a general misconnect in supply and demand fundamentals. But I will also say that tariffs can actually be deflationary because of the demand destruction that tends to happen as a result of prices going up. So it's very counterintuitive. You think, yes, we're going to add all these surcharges, we're going to elevate the price level of certain goods and services, but then at that new price point, the demand for those goods and services is much lower. And so in return, suppliers and producers actually lower prices to stimulate some buying behavior. So tariffs could be certainly inflationary short term. Longer term, like 6, 9, 12 months out, could actually be deflationary.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, next one up is, can you clarify the reciprocal tariffs you discussed? You mentioned that they're not in effect now, meaning the final numbers, right? Correct. So there's a 10% in now, but until final deals, is that where you were going with that?
Yeah, so the baseline 10% tariff, and my expectations, frankly speaking, is that remains in place. Beyond the negotiating period, President Trump has been nothing if not consistent about using tariffs as a policy-making tool. He uses as a geopolitical negotiating tool as well to extract concessions in defense, in NATO spending, in immigration and drug trade. So I expect a baseline level of tariff to exist. Beyond that, the reciprocal tariffs that are country specific, that's what I was alluding to as being kind of on a 90-day hold, with the exception, of course, of China, which is at 145 right now. But so I was asked the question during a keynote that I delivered earlier this morning, actually, is what is my expectation of the final tariff rate in the US after all of this gets settled? My response was in a more optimistic tone, 10 to 15%. Now that's a significant increase relative to the 3% that we had in 2024 and historically. But I can also seeing it going into the 15 to 20% bracket. I don't think it's going to go all the way to 25%, but it will be a substantial increase in the overall tariff rate, and we should all be preparing for that.
Is there any particular sector or industry that you feel like is going to have a steeper decline based on those tariffs?
If you look at things like automotive, for example, big ticket items where the prices have already experienced a long period of increase. The average price of a new car, for instance, is about $45,000 as of 2024 in the US. You add, a 25% baseline tariff on top of that, it becomes very unaffordable very, very quickly, right? And it's not just going to affect new cars; it's going to affect used cars as well, because of the car parts tariff that exists. So I think that's an area that's very susceptible to it. Certainly, disproportionately going to take a larger hit. Low-cost consumer goods, largely the ones that we bring in from China. So we're talking about consumer electronics, clothing, toys, basic small home appliances, things of that nature, also very sensitive to price changes and are likely to see significant price increases because that negotiation with China is going to take longer than some of the other countries that we discussed earlier today. So I think that that's another area that's going to be, quite impacted. And then there are sectors that, like oil and gas, for example. I think that that's going to be a segment of the economy that is relatively resilient as we try to amp up production, right? So there are going to be very much winners and losers when it comes to these tariffs.
Makes sense. So this one's a little longer term, right? So we've been talking
Sure.
a lot of short-term tariffs. This question is more about your thoughts on the longer term economy, say 5 to 10 years out with,
Okay.
with US debt and population and demographic changes. What do you see with something like that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly structurally, these are problems that we've got to figure out. And we have signs that the pressure coming from these issues, particularly on the debt side, is not only building but getting unsustainable, right? I mean, last year was the first year that the interest only payment on the national debt exceeded our entire defense budget. We spent $1.1 trillion just on interest payments. I mean, it's basically flushing money down the toilet. It's not, it could be used for so many more productive and effective things, right? So these are real issues. I'm glad from some perspective that we're actually acknowledging this and we're trying to do something about it. Whereas previous administrations, I would say, were pretty nonchalant and kind of we're happy to keep kicking that can down the road. At least the recognition, even within the GOP, the fiscal hawks saying we can't just continue to have fiscal deficits. We can't just continue to spend more money that we earn. So there's a recognition there and an attempt, right, at doing something about it. It's probably too little too late to stave off a significant downturn. But I also don't buy into the notion that it's going to collapse the economy, that it's going to be like the Great Depression all over again, right? And we have examples. For instance, you look at Japan, right? Debt to GDP ratio way above ours, over 200%, demographic decline that is much worse than ours. We do not have a collapse of the Japanese economy. Yes, we have stagflation. Yes, we have a period of deflationary pressure and low economic growth, but we do not have this collapse that you think about when you think about, 1929, where you have 20% unemployment, you have food lines. So I tend to say, yes, these are major issues that we're going to continue to butt up against over the next 5 to 10 years. Does that automatically mean we have the next depression in this country? No, I don't believe so. I don't think that that's necessarily true.
That's good insight. And we're going to go back down from high level down to low level again.
Okay.
And this question is about your projection or thoughts on the Taiwanese dollar.
Yeah, I mean, I think President Trump wants to see the US dollar deflate relative to other currencies. The strength of the dollar means that our exports, which, by the way, most people don't realize this, but the US is the second largest exporter in the world after China. So we want to stimulate export activity, which is obviously why the reciprocal tariffs that other countries place on us are going to be so painful and already are in the case of Canada, right? So I think that the weakening of the US dollar is by design with this administration. And so the fact that the Taiwanese dollar or some other currencies, the British pound, the euro have appreciated is literally what President Trump wants to see in terms of stimulating that export activity. Interestingly enough, we have a devaluation of the Chinese renminbi versus the dollar. And this is really indicative of how unfair the marketplace is when a government fully controls its currency and it's not allowed to float freely in the market like the rest of the currencies are, which is, by the way, why I don't believe the Chinese renminbi will ever replace the dollar as the global reserve or the facilitator of global trade or any of that stuff. That's all nonsense, right? So I would say the Taiwanese dollar is showing what we are seeing in a lot of other much bigger, much more leading and important currencies like the euro, like the pound, like the yen, which is an appreciation versus the dollar. And that's by design that the administration wants to see to stimulate more export activity.
All right, let's talk a little bit about maybe some more tactical stuff. So what we've heard a lot of, and we just published an article from Granger about how they're handling the tariff situation. And everybody's not Granger, trust me, I realize that.
Right.
But one of the things they've talked about is passing a lot of that cost on to the end user. Now that in smaller distributors is a little trickier, right?
Yes.
But one of the ideas is that says you take a bigger piece of that and pass it on to your non-contracted, your C and D type customers, where you try to buffer your A and Bs. What's your thoughts on a strategy like that?
It makes a certain level of logical sense. Like you treat your good customers in a slightly preferential way that you treat your bad ones. But I think you also have to do kind of a test scenario, right, to see how much that tends to affect the business. Like you have a certain subset of your customers you can try that with. Don't just roll it out across the board
Yeah.
immediately, right? I think that in general, my recommendation on the pricing element actually has nothing to do with the specific price changes that you implement, rather the volume of communication that happens between you and your suppliers and your customers. I would say increase communication by 50% or more, and try to be as transparent with your own thinking with up and down the supply chain as you can be,
Yeah,
and
makes
encourage
sense.
your partners to do the same. I had a conversation with a business the other day. They said, there's so much going on. We can't get some of our suppliers to even pick up the phone when we call them. And I said, at what point do you book a plane ticket and take them out for a coffee and just have that conversation, right? So I
Right.
think that that's a really important element that not enough companies are doing. They're kind of keeping the cadence of the communication the same, and it needs to be jacked up. If you're usually talking to your customers once a quarter, do it on a monthly basis. If you're doing it monthly, do it on a weekly basis, right? Really elevate that level, be forthcoming with your own thinking and information, and encourage them to do the same with you. I think that that builds more of a moat around your business in terms of just being transactional to being more strategic and locking in some of that business long term. So in general, I would say, yes, you can do a scenario kind of simulation with a subset of your customers to see how they react. Obviously, there's the elasticity of demand to consider. You might see that the smaller companies don't push back as much, or you might see that they push back a lot and you lose that business, right? So it's a testing environment that you really need to tread carefully. What I would caution against is making major moves, drastic moves that you can't easily unwind. Take it slow, stay calm, and carry on. Be very strategic in this assessment as you move forward, especially until you get more clarity about what the future holds.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. And trying to appease those large customers really is a challenge. And I love the way you've kind of talked about that. And the other thing that's out there is how the kind of mid-tier distributors get caught in this squeeze, right? They don't have the upstream leverage with suppliers, and they don't have downstream pricing power. What are some of those things that just don't that exist outside of those two levers that distributors should at least pay attention to and include in some of their scenario planning?
Yeah, so two of the things that are very much in company control. One has to do with kind of the asking yourself the question, are we doing things the most effective, productive, and efficient way possible? I think a lot of businesses that I work with got away from that in that 22, 23 timeframe when business was booming, orders were growing, backlog was building. And so they were just trying to keep up with demand. There was not the scrutiny of your operation and saying, is there a better way, more effective, more productive way of doing that? Now is a very opportune time to do that. Ask yourself, can we do things better, leaner, more efficient, more with more cost savings in mind? The second element has to do with that cost structure, which is ask yourself, when is the last time that I actually shopped around for all of the inputs that I buy as a business? Not the material stuff, not the tariff-oriented stuff, but like my electricity prices, my shipping and logistics contracts, right? There's a lot of arbitrage opportunity in the trucking sector right now, especially when you compare contract prices to spot prices. When is the last time you got 5 or 6 quotes from different electricity providers to see if you can get a better energy rate, right? Like these are tangible cost savings that you can recognize, and that will immediately impact your bottom line. But most people are in this kind of regularly scheduled cadence of doing things like that. If you haven't shopped around in the last 6 months, do it. It takes a little bit of time. You get 4 or 5 different quotes, and you see if you can get some savings. Worst case scenario, you don't realize any savings, right? But best case scenario is you realize substantial savings. And I like this notion because it allows you to leverage other people's pessimism to your advantage, right?
That's great.
So like take advantage of the opportunity that's presented right now and get some cost savings locked in.
Yeah, I talked to a distributor the other day who got extended terms. They got free freight for 3 months, for a commitment to locking into a new product line. So it didn't cost the supplier anything. And they want to, again, back to that communication with your suppliers. do it more frequently, more often.
Yeah, absolutely. Great example.
All right, so we're coming up on it, and I want to make sure we respect people's time. So I'm going to ask you this one last question.
Shoot.
If you had 5 minutes with a distributor CEO, what would be the thing you've urged him to do this week?
I think that the recognition that the game has changed and is likely to remain very volatile moving forward means that someone's got to take ownership of this process of constantly scanning, adapting, figuring out strategy. It's not just like a business as usual type of approach, but without having someone be like that chief tariff officer, if you will, a lot of times people are just asked to pick this up as part of their regular duties. So an allocation of mind space and resources to deal with this into the future, I think is really, really important. The other thing that I will say to a business leader is, people are looking to you for confidence and calm right now. I mean, really, that is the best thing that you can do is say, look, yes, these are volatile times. We've survived things that have been worse than this. We will get past this, and we will continue to be a great company. We were working on it. Rest assured, we're either coming up with a plan or we already have a plan of action. Keep calm and carry on. And the second element of that is, I love the saying, pressure, no pressure, no diamonds. Like, this is the time where you can really reinvigorate yourself, revitalize the business, become leaner, more efficient, and really break out, create some competitive advantage for yourself. Use times of struggle to become better versions of your business. That would be my message to the CEO.
And that's spot on. And I just talked to that same distributor, and they do a Monday morning 10 o'clock, 10-minute margin call. And exactly what you described, just be open and honest. And that's the best way to communicate and work ourselves through this. So
Agreed.
This has been amazing, Alex. Really appreciate, your time and your expertise here. I mean, I know the distribution group has gotten a lot out of this hour together. So before we wrap up, a couple of quick things from DSG. One of those is happening tomorrow, and that is the state of CRM and analytics. Alex is busy
sharing. Yes, there we go.
Sharing screen. Awesome. Thank you. So Jonathan Bine, our PA resident PhD, will be talking about the state of CRM and sales analytics tomorrow. This is the 5th year we've done this. This is an amazing, report out of what's happening with CRMs. You do not want to miss this one, sponsored by our friends at Network and our other friends at White Cup. That's going to be a great one. And then on the 14th, we're going to be doing emerging digital tools for distributors. Again, sponsored by Epicor, and we're going to have Carrie Jordan from Epicor and Brooks Hamilton from Hamilton AI Strategy on board. So looking forward to those next 2 programs. Appreciate everybody's time today. Alex, man, thank you for educating us. It was amazing. I know we're going to get a lot more questions on the back end, but appreciate your time today, my friend, and hope everybody has a great rest of your week.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.